Gene, could you tell me where you were when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I was northeast of the old town of Manford, Oklahoma.
And of course, that was the onset of World War II.
Yes.
Could you describe how you became involved in that conflict?
Well, about everybody was talking about going to some service or the other, and I picked out the Marine Corps to go to. I went enlisted in January the 12th of 1944.
Could you
Reported at MCRD at San Diego on the 24th of January of 1944. And from there, taking boot training the middle of March, and then went to Camp Elliott, A-1 mortar training, and went to a tent camp called Linda Vista, and waiting for transportation overseas, and left San Diego on the USS Lafayette to Pearl Harbor. Stayed a few days at Pearl Harbor and boarded Santa Monica to Maui. We was there for a few days. And then we come aboard the USS Sanborn, I think it was, and went to Island Tinian, Mariana Islands, with the invasion forces there, with the 4th Division.
Could you describe in more detail what your role was in the invasion force and your experiences during the invasion?
Well, we run into quite a few Japs, and which they was fighting for their country just like we were ours. But we had quite a bit of combat, but not near like they did on some islands. And got into ambush at one time. 2 of our guys killed, 1 wounded, and we're taking a bunker. That, I don't know how many people were killed there, but I know 2 of my friends was. And that was on, I think it was about 12 days on Island Tinian, attached to the 4th Division, and then 4th Division, the older people was going back to Maui, their home base, for R&R, and newer people, well, we went to Saipan. Most of us did, with the 2nd Division, and mostly we taking training and patrols up in the hills and things like that. Because you had a lot of Japanese that left there in the caves and the jungle and one thing and another. And then we left Saipan, I think it's about the 15th of March of 45, and went to Okinawa, made what's called a fence landing at Okinawa, which is on the 1st day of April in 1945.
Could you describe what a fate landing is?
Fake landing, fence landing is like a fake landing, and it's April Fool's Day, and they wanted to fool the Japs and thinking we was going to land there, but actually the main force was landing further around the island. And we did get some kamikaze planes in there and damaged some ships, and sank one of them, one LST, and damaged the LST and damaged the APA. They made it get repaired though. But the last I heard that it's about 130 some Marines killed on that LST, and some Navy, but I don't know how many. And then we left there and sailed around in Philippine Sea and up to close to Sasebo, Japan, and back down into China Sea. And he said it was about 100 miles from China and about 100 miles from Sasebo, and we got one submarine attack in the China Sea. The submarine got one torpedo off, but it didn't hit a ship. And we had a destroyer up there close, and he dropped 3 depth charges and got the submarine. And later, I think it was the next day, we had an air raid warning. All the troops had to go down below deck. And we heard later that they'd sent 12 planes over, 12 bombers, and we had all kinds of ships over. They were rising, aircraft carriers and cruisers, battle wagons and all that, and they sent planes out and knocked the 12 planes down. And we got back on Saipan, why that's when it told us what it was doing out there. We didn't know. But then we started training to make the invasion of Japan itself. In the then we on Tinian was where the Enola Gay and the boxcar both left off to go drop the atomic and the plutonium bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so we didn't have to go and make the invasion, but we did go and occupation duty on Japan, and which the Japanese people, why we learned to like them quite a bit. It just people like here in the United States, as far as we is concerned. We tried to, well, we always try to be good to the children, all the civilians, and we didn't have no grudge against any of them. I didn't anyway. And so we got these there tropical candy bars as chocolate, and I would gather them up and give them to the children, and packs of sugar, whatever we could find like that. And we made patrols up in the hills and through the towns and one thing and another looking for arms and ammunition, and so didn't find much of anything. We had pretty well disposed of it, I guess.
And where did you serve as occupation duty?
We landed at Nagasaki on the 23rd of September 1945, and we stayed there till the 9th of November, and we taken LST to Kanoya, Japan, and then taking the train across the Kyushu Island to Miyazaki, and that's where we stayed until I come home. Right there by 15th of March of '46. But in the meantime, we did go up through Hiroshima and to R&R. And there, Dr. remember, is a place called Gamagori. Now, so I don't remember whether I pronounced that right or not. But anyway, we eat good, and there's plenty of pop or whatever you want to drink up there. And so and the people was nice up there to enjoy yourself. So then when we come home, then I got to San Diego on the 3rd of April of 1946, and there at San Diego with the MCRD, and then I got discharged on the 11th of April of '46. Because the train got home on the 15th of April, same year.
Can I ask you some questions about some? If we can go all the way back to Tinian, which was that your first combat action?
Yes.
Could you maybe describe how you felt and what the conditions were like as you were on the landing ship for the first time, heading towards the beaches?
Well, you're scared, that's for sure. And if you weren't scared, I don't think you had very good brains, very good mind. But you just taking it in stride because it's what we all had to do. And so because it was a scary situation, and you didn't never know from one minute to the next what he's going to be there or not, and it's live anyway. And so and you see a lot of people getting killed. A lot of people had been killed from the pre-invasion bombardment and bombing and all that. And a lot of Japanese were killed in these here banzai attacks. And the first night, there's about 1,250 of them killed there at one attack, and there's about 150 of our guys got killed. But, that's the biggest one that they had, though. They're on Tinian.
In your role, you were attached with the 4th Division for Tinian?
Yes.
And what was your role? What was your primary duty?
I was a rifleman on Tinian. I'd taken training as an 81 mortarman, and when we got Tinian occupied, why they told me that I could go back into the 81 mortars if I wanted to, and I'd already got acquainted with the guys in the platoon. The rifle company, and I told them I'd just stay there where I was at. That's what I've done.
So after the landings, could you maybe describe day to day what sort of things on Tinian the Marines did to take that island? What do you recall about that?
Well, we got in what they call echelon. That's just a line of men across the island, and we went approximately halfway across the island on the west side, and the 2nd Division is on the east side. We come over about halfway and displaced the men. Just varied on the distance we could walk, because sometimes you could walk fairly close, you had to, and then sometimes you could be quite a ways apart so you could see better. We got in jungle and tall cane fields and things like that. You had to walk a little bit closer, you'd sure bypass the Japanese. And we bypassed some of them anyway. It was hid in caves and things like that, and we just couldn't see them. We tried not to bypass any of them because they'd raise up behind you and shoot you in the back if you bypassed them.
How would you describe the resistance that you faced?
Well, it was fierce. They didn't give up their ground very easy. And they determined that they was going to take as many of us as they could before they got killed. So it's one of them things that they wanted to cut our numbers down and try to discourage us from going on into Japan. But they didn't, so.
How long would you estimate that you were on Tinian before the island was secure, if I can call quote-unquote secure?
It's probably about 10 days, near as I can remember.
Okay. And was a lot of the fighting close contact? Did you have a lot of contact with the Japanese forces as you guys made your ways across the island?
Well, yeah, it was kind of, might go for part of a day and not even see a Jap, and then all at once where you'd either run into you think what I'm trying to say now? Attack me, it'd be hidden, you'd walk up among them and ambush you, and I know we got some guys killed, ambushed and wounded, and I know the evening before we got Tinian secured, why we ran into an ambush and there's 2 of our guys killed and 1 wounded pretty bad. But that's about the last ones we lost, though, I think, before to get secured the next day.
Do you have any estimate of like the men in your company? Was the casualty rate pretty high, or was it?
I don't know about the company. For the 4th Division, it was almost 300 deaths though on Tinian, and the 2nd Division I think is just about the same thing. It's pretty close to it, and there's a lot more than that wounded. But I think it's about 300 for each division killed, pretty close to it.
And so then after you guys mopped up on Tinian, you mentioned that you went on to Saipan.
Yeah, we Saipan and Tinian just about 4 or 5 miles apart, and we boarded the LST and went to Saipan. And with us, well, people I was with, you know, already in 2nd Division, but we was just attached to the 4th Division. So we went back into 2nd Division, and that's when we started taking training for Okinawa, and went on the patrols because we'd bypassed a lot of Japs that had been in caves in different places and trees, I don't know where, that we had to go back and get a lot of them. And because they started killing some of the people if they catch them out, and they killed some of the people just traveling through or something that's do the, on the roads there. And even go into camp sometimes and steal them stuff, and I don't know whether anybody killed at the camp or not. I didn't never hear if there was. I know in our camp they weren't, and but there was other places, and so at one time they taken the whole division, whole 2nd Division, and made echelons across the island, and we got around 300 Japs that one time.
Could you describe any patrols that were more memorable? Is there any patrol in particular that sticks out in your mind?
Well, the one there is on the more toward the north end of Saipan. That is real rough country in there, and a lot of caves and everything, and we ran into quite a bit of trouble. I think it's 3 or 4 of our guys that got killed and 2 or 3 of them wounded that time. And the but that's about we just wanted to get killed here and there, you know. Wasn't anything very much. And I know one time on Saipan, they was having trouble at the east end of the B-29 strip. The B-29s would take off. The Japs in that real rough area there, they would shoot at the planes, and sometimes it hit the planes, but I swear I know they didn't hit any of the crew.
Wow.
But they sent us over there, a platoon of us, and we got all the Japs we could get. We got several of them that day. I don't remember what the number was. And we didn't lose any guys that day. And but we just over that one day. And so we went back and we started taking rubber boat training. This little island that laid off of Saipan and Tinian named Echelon, and they was going to take it because they had a radio station, and the Japs would call radio to Japan whenever our B-29s would take off on a raid for Japan, and notify them if they was B-29s on the way. So of course fighters and aircraft guys, everything be waiting on them. And by the time we got the rubber boat training done, why they knocked that radio out. We were sure glad of it.
You also mentioned that you had training after the Tinian operation on Saipan, and also training after Saipan for Okinawa. Could you describe what the training was like?
Well, we had a lot of these here training in the jungle, and we'd have what they call pull targets, and be silhouettes of Japanese that they'd be laying down. Well, the rifleman would be walking in front, and sergeant or somebody like that be walking behind him, and of course we couldn't see what they was doing. And they had a wire tied to a target, and at this target, whenever the rifleman get up pretty well within 20 to 30 feet of it, why that sergeant, whoever behind you, that pull on that wire and raise that target up in front of you real quick. Or at that time you didn't have time to aim, you shot from the hip. And at that time I was carrying a BAR. That's, a lot of people don't know what that is. It's a Browning automatic rifle, and it's, you can set it just like a machine, fire like a machine gun, or one shot at a time. And so that's what I carried most of the time I was on Saipan. And but we shot most of our shots in the jungle from the hip.
Interesting. So you were a BAR man in Saipan.
Yeah.
And what did you carry before that?
I went into Tinian with a carbine, 30 caliber carbine, and I didn't like it very well, so I traded it for a M-1 Garand, and I carried it on through Tinian, and when I got to Saipan then, I traded M1 for a bar then. I liked it a lot better. It was a lot heavier to carry, but you carry 260 rounds of ammunition, and that bar with the bipod weighed 20 pounds instead of your M1 weighing just a little over 9 pounds.
You said you didn't care for the carbine very much?
No, it's good just for real short range, but and if all your shots was short range, it'd be okay, but sometimes it'd be 200 or 300 yards. And it wasn't no good for 200 or 300 yards.
Interesting. So is there any other, is there anything else about Saipan that you remember before you guys invaded Okinawa that kind of sticks out after all this time?
Well, after we come back from Okinawa, they built a 4-lane highway across Saipan, which we hadn't had before. And the Japs sometimes would get up at night, and then the construction crew would usually quit at midnight. By the time we got away from there, they would be about 1 o'clock. And the Japs would come in there and shoot at them. I was out on a road patrol or dozers or whatever was operating, and they'd send us up there, and we'd have outposts, different places up in the hills around where they was working at, and try to where the construction guys could work.
But this was after Okinawa, right?
Yeah, part of it was after Okinawa and part of it before Okinawa.
So it sounds like the Japanese never really stopped shooting on Saipan.
I was talking to one of my friends that he was out there at Saipan about 7 years after we was there, and he told about one instance that some guys, they had a golf course there when he was there, and so some of the guys get killed once in a while, and getting from gunshot, and they found out that the Japs were raiding up a little plot of sod there, and there's in a tunnel underneath that golf course, and it is yet there 7 years after that, and I heard about them. Some of them not giving up till way after the war, so several years. So and another instance on, I think it's on Guam, that they kept getting some guys killed there, and they found out the Japs had holed up in a disabled tank out there not far from one of the buildings. And they'd get up out of the tank and shoot somebody, and they were back in that tank. Nobody thought to look in that tank for a while.
So it's interesting, when you read books or watch the History Channel, they make it sound really clean, like they took the island and moved on to the next one, but in reality the fighting occurred throughout the rest of the war and well after.
The fighting continued at a certain extent. I mean, we lost some people, you know, even after the island was secured. And because the Japs would catch them out, you know, they'd shoot them. I know that time that we made that their sweep across Saipan with 2nd Division, why, when we got through, we'd lost, I think, 5 or 6 of our guys. We didn't lose any out of our regiment, but some of the, we didn't out of our company. I was in the C company, and the A company, they lost some guys out of their A company. They did, I forgot about that.
And then after Saipan, of course, you mentioned the feint at Okinawa. Could you maybe describe in more detail what you knew when you were ready to invade Okinawa, and then what ended up happening, what a feint is?
Well, whenever we went to Okinawa, they didn't really tell us a lot about it. They just told us that, and we didn't know this until we got there at the island as to where we was going to land. And we didn't know for sure, or they didn't know where the artillery would be zeroed in off the coast there. And we did know it looked like it was pretty rough country there where we was supposed to have landed. And that's what we thought we was going to be doing until they turned around and went back and found out that we was headed back to our ships then. Which that's a relief.
But it kind of wasn't nice either to have all you boys on those transports getting ready to go into battle again and then find out that you were turning around and going back to the ship. I mean,
yeah,
must have been quite an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, it was. It is emotional. It had to be, although we didn't think of it at that time as such, but it was. And but one thing we do, and it's just no saying, but it's just like we're on the same boat, so so to speak. So
Quite literally in this case.
Yeah, that's right.
So when the landing craft went back to the main landing ship, and what were those called again?
This is called a LCT, I think the one that was on, the kind of the troops was on.
So could you just describe the trek, what occurred as back
Well, these here was, they call them Higgin boats actually, because there's several types of them. But it's made down there from a guy named Higgins, I think it's in Louisiana, that he perfected them boats, and there's a lot of them, part of them is made out of plywood, and part of them steel frame, and the ramp on them was, they let down the cable and dropped by a winch, and but they were steel, but the boat itself, a lot of the shell was plywood. So shells, it didn't turn shells very well.
Went right through them.
Yep. And which we did get quite a few shells, and we stayed down low as we could.
So after they load you back onto the main landing craft, could you describe your odyssey back to Saipan in a little more detail?
Well, we left Okinawa, and we didn't know where we was going or anything like that. But they told us when we got back to Saipan that we'd been within about 100 miles of Sasebo, Japan, and over in the China Sea, and about 100 miles from China. And that's where we encountered the Jap submarine and the Japanese bombers, and in the China Sea. Where on one side of Okinawa is the Philippine Sea, and on the other side is China Sea. So, which was in both of them, Pacific too. So.
And then of course you went back to Saipan, and there you trained for the ultimate invasion of Japan.
Right.
Which, for you guys, fortunately didn't occur because the war ended.
Yeah.
Could you describe where you were when the war ended and what your feelings were?
I was there in Saipan, and I know the time we heard that the bombs had been dropped, and then it just 3 or 4 days or something like that before the Japs actually gave up. And we were really glad of that. But I was at the camp there on Saipan whenever the bombs was dropped, and now I don't remember, we might have been on patrol or something at the time, but I don't remember that, whether I was or not. And we went on patrol till actually when the war was actually over. And while I was talking about the Japanese signing the surrender papers, well, we was yet on patrol. And they did actually say they was going to go out there and surrender.
And how'd you feel about that? I mean, you know the war's over. You don't want to incur any more casualties. You don't want to take any more casualties.
No.
And you know they're still shooting at you. That must have been very difficult.
It was. We went on patrols, like I say, right up till they told us to quit going on patrol. And which our platoon leader, he was sick. He committed suicide just before we went into Japan, and I yet think that he was yet taking us on patrol, hoping he'd get killed instead of having to kill himself.
Wow.
That's what actually I really think that.
Did he broke under the strain?
What?
Did he break under the strain? Is that why?
No, he had some difficulties. I'd rather not say that, because in case some of his family would ever see that or something, tie 2 and 2 together.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to anything like that to happen.
No
They would find that out. They probably was notified he just killed her. Maybe not in action, but they're on the island, you know. But actually, he did kill himself.
And so after Saipan, again, and the war was over, how did you feel when they told you guys were going to be part of the occupying force?
I didn't mind that. I really didn't. I was anxious to see Japan.
Interesting.
and because now if we'd been going in to invade Japan, that probably felt a lot different.
Yeah.
But although I didn't any invasion or anything, I never did really mind to go, but because I knew it was necessary. But and like I say, I was afraid for my life, just like anybody would be. But as far as being really historically afraid or anything like that, I wasn't. And just like I always thought, it's okay to be afraid, but just keep control of your fear.
Mm-hmm. So could you describe how you felt and what you experienced when you first stepped foot on Japan? Where were you, and what did it look like, and what were you thinking and seeing at the time?
Well, we went into Nagasaki, Japan, and again we went in on in Nagasaki Harbor, and we went on these here landing barges like we went into Tinian and to Okinawa, and I know there's yet just some dead Japs laying there in the harbor, and been killed, and they hadn't gathered them up yet. And but when we landed there in Nagasaki, why, of course it'd been Nagasaki hadn't been bombed like a lot of cities had, except for the plutonium bomb. And there's a lot of stuff that was tore up and stuff, but it's from that one bombing. And it wasn't from a continuous bombing like from high explosive or napalm or anything like that, like a lot of cities were. A lot of cities was burnt. This here was so there to where the plutonium bomb was dropped, why it got almost all the buildings, and quite a lot of dust that's laying there. They gathered up a lot of the stuff and disposed of it. The Japanese had before we got in there, to clean the streets and all that kind of things. But there's a lot of people that yet was burnt. I know one night there I was on guard duty, and seen a fire. I could tell it was a fire. Seen a light there in an old streetcar, and so I was right at the edge of my post. So I went down there and looked to see what was going on. I thought something had just got a fire there, and so I would have reported, you know. But there's 2 women and 1 man in there, and one of the women, she was burnt real bad on her one leg, and the man, his burnt pretty bad, but he wasn't as bad as this one woman. And they was real poor. They just real pitiful to look at them. And so I reported it to the division MPs the next morning, and they went down there and they called somebody to get them and take them to the hospital.
You mean Bert? You mean from the atomic bomb?
Yes, but it's a plutonium bomb that they dropped on Nagasaki, and it's the atomic bomb that's dropped on Hiroshima.
That's right. There's a difference. Obviously, that was a pretty seminal event in world history. You knew about Nagasaki being bombed by the atom bomb.
Oh yeah.
When you went in there and had a chance to look at the damage, did it match what you thought it would look like?
It pretty well did, although I didn't. It's almost impossible to believe that one bomb could do that much damage. And which I was through Hiroshima twice, just on the train. You know, we had a layover there to go into a tunnel, from Kyushu to Honshu, and a 5-mile tunnel under the ocean that separated them, and they had to bring an electric engine, because we had steam engines there, and so we had to wait and get the electric engine to hook on the cars to take them to that tunnel, and so therefore we had to wait each time for almost a day, and which at Japanese that they come in there and they had a big wood heat stove. That was in January, and of 45, and it's pretty chilly, and they take rice balls and put them on top of this big coal heating stove. And the coal or Coke, I don't remember which one they use now. I know Coke they use some of it, no, but I don't remember on that particular time it was coal or Coke. And but they'd heat that rice up and eat it. That's all they had to eat. A lot of them people.
How did the Japanese treat the American soldiers who were occupying the country?
They treated us real well, I thought, under the circumstances. And I know was one woman, she had a daughter that I'd say the daughter was probably 10, 11, maybe something like that. And so she was cooking, deep frying fish and potatoes. They rode along the side of the sidewalk. And so I got talking to them, you know, and they wanted me to eat some of that with them. And so I ate a piece of fish, piece of potato. And of course I pretty near always had some of them candy bars or some sugar or something like that with me. And so I give them some of that. And but it's pretty good. It's deep fried it in this pot she had there. And so, but I'd learned enough Japanese language to kind of get by with what hand signals and things like that we could use too. Mm. And we kind of communicate that way. We had these Japanese phrase books that we have studied quite a bit.
Were you the first Americans that the citizens of Nagasaki saw after the war?
They sent some guys in there just ahead of us that I found out later that they taken these POWs out of a POW camp there. Hmm. And but they'd already got them out before we got there.
Okay. Could you describe what your day-to-day living conditions were like in Tinian and Saipan versus being the occupying force in Japan?
The living conditions, we got a lot of rain there. I know on Tinian we had a typhoon, and we'd sleep sometimes with our head sticking out of the water. The rest of our body would be submerged under the water. And we try to keep a rifle up as dry as we could. But there's no way keeping it dry. We just try to keep the mud out of it is what we were trying to do. But there's no way keeping it dry. But them M1s, though, they'd fire if there's quite a bit of water in them.
So they're pretty reliable?
Yeah, pretty reliable. And we'd try to clean them the next day before we started out on the line there. And most of the time it was on the front lines, in the regiment I was in. So I think it bothered me so much about that water though. Next morning, at night, whenever we dug in, the next morning when I got up, I smelled dead Japs all night, and there's two just above our foxhole, and the water's running off of them right down in our foxhole.
Oh man. It's hard to wash that off, isn't it?
Do what?
It'd be hard to wash that off.
Oh, it was.
I mean, you know.
Well, it was raining so hard, we got washed pretty good.
And of course, as an occupier in Japan, your day-to-day living conditions were like?
In Japan, why, we did a journey. Sometimes we'd have to sleep out, but most journey we'd find an abandoned house or something like that. I know out of Nagasaki, I know one night we stayed overnight out there in that little town, and there's a big mansion type house. It's empty. There wasn't nobody living in it. And it had one of the prettiest wood floors I think I've ever seen in any house. And of course we slept on ours. We carried 2 blankets with us and our poncho, and we'd sleep on one blanket and cover up the other one in the poncho. And we was used to sleeping on the ground or hard floors or whatever, concrete if necessary. So we had insects there just like everywhere. I got bit by one of them big long centipedes at one time on Saipan.
Really?
They got bit on the shin. Some people call it bit, and some of them called it stinging, so I don't know which it was. I know it made me sick for a little while. I went by the corpsman's tent and told him about it, and he said, well, it'll make your legs swell up, make you sick. And I said, well, I've already done that. So I was going on guard duty when I went by his tent.
Yeah, you also mentioned the B-29s. When did you see your first B-29 and what was your impression of that ship?
I think I've been probably maybe the first of 45, or I don't remember seeing them, but last of 44. Even like in 40, I know it's 45. I'll see them for sure, but I don't remember now what I've seen any late 44 or not.
What's your impression of them when you saw it?
Do what?
What was your impression when you saw them?
I thought that was the biggest plane I'd ever seen. A lot of them. And I did get acquainted with, after I got home, with some of the guys that was in the B-29s. Guy who's out north down here, his name is Ray Tate. He was in B-29s on Saipan while I was there. I didn't know him at the time, although I knew some of his brothers and people like that. They're in Old Manford, that relation of his. And then another guy, Rex Ross, he gave me a picture of, he's a photographer on B-29, and while I was taking the, signing the treaty, why he taking a picture of it, out of Missouri, and I've got a picture of it that he gave me. Oh, it's pretty interesting. I know I wouldn't take anything from my experiences, and I sure hate to go to it again. I know that. But.
Well, speaking of that, you know, could you maybe describe your homecoming when you finally got home from the service after being gone for a couple of years? What was that like?
Well, I was glad to get home, and I just like to say, you know, we got to. I hadn't had any fresh milk since I was in Pearl Harbor, and that's over 2 years. And so the first thing I'd done, got me a glass of fresh milk, or a little carton, or whatever it's serving. I don't remember now what they're serving, and a donut. I'd had one fresh donut that I remember. I don't think I even got them in Pearl Harbor. But when we got done that there cleanup operation there on the east end of the B-29 strip on Saipan, the Red Cross was up there at the B-29 strip and gave us a cup of coffee and a donut. And I had a little wagon there that they pulled out there. And that's all I ever got from them. But anyway, why, I appreciated it even that much.
What about back home with your parents? How'd that go?
Okay, so I say I left San Diego on the 11th of April '46, and I got to Oklahoma City the night of the 14th of April, and I stayed with my aunt and uncle and cousins up there that night. Then I would come back down the bus from Oklahoma City. I rode a train from San Diego to Oklahoma City, and then I caught a bus from Oklahoma City to Manford, and I got back to Manford, I think it was a little after noon. And it's kind of a rainy, drizzly day that day, and but they just happened to be in town. They lived about between 3 and 4 miles from town, and so they was in town. So I got to ride them home then. Of course, I was glad to see them, and they was glad to see me, I think.
What'd you do after your time in the service?
Well, about 2 weeks after I got home, I met my wife. That's later she's my wife, but Mary Cisco was her maiden name. Mary Lee Cisco. Spelled her name as M-E-R-R-Y, because she was born on the 24th of December, and her dad had named her Mary, like a Merry Christmas. And so we went together till 11th of October '46, and we got married. And then we ended up raising 4 children. We lost one son in 1994. 1994 was cancer, and we ended up with 8 grandkids and 8 great-grandkids, 8 great-grandkids.
Mm-hmm. An extended family.
And we've been happy and had a good marriage. And I've been in several kinds of businesses, and journey I always worked for myself, except for probably about 3 years of my life. Well, 3 years since I've been married, and I've had to work for other people, of course, before I went into service some. I went to harvest whenever I was 16 up in Kansas. I hitchhiked up there and stayed up there and worked for one family in board and room. And it was a real nice family. And then I went back the next year, but I rode a bus that year. Didn't have to hitchhike. And worked for the same family. And then I worked for Frisco Railroad for a while, just before I went into service.
Over 60 years have gone by since your time in the service. Can you maybe comment on what are the strongest memories that stick back, that stick with you after all this time has passed about your time in the service?
Well, what bothered me the most was I mentioned when we were taking that bunker there on Tinian, and 2 of my friends got killed. One of them I went through boot camp with, and the other one joined not long afterwards. And the one of them he's probably about 6 foot from me, and the other one is probably about 10 or 12 foot from me when they both got killed. And plus some other people got killed there, but I didn't know them, no. But I did know these 2. And it really bothered me because I thought that they would have dropped a napalm on that bunker because they were out in the open. There was nothing to keep them from seeing it. And that bothered me, I guess, about the most of anything while I was in the service.
One last question for me about time of service. After experiencing everything that occurred during World War II, in what ways do you think it's affected your life after the war?
Well, I was always considerate of other people, and I think at the war, I think maybe more considerate of people, if anything. And I've always liked people, and that's one reason when I went into Japan. Well, I knew I was probably going to like them people when I went into Japan, because I just raised that way and try not to hold a grudge and things like that. And now for the Japanese military and their government, I don't think anything of them that way. But as far as the civilians, I don't hold a grudge at all against them. Because I don't think they had anything to do with the war.
The tape is almost over. This has been a good interview. I really appreciate you allowing me into your house. I was just wondering if you had anything you'd like to add before we conclude the interview.
I can't think of anything right now.
Okay.
Did you get something down about being with the code talkers?
No.
Just a comment on that?
Well, I was with the code talkers there. At least one of them would go on patrol with each platoon. They're on Saipan, and so they're on one particular time. We pup tented together, me and this one code talker, and that's the night that I got stung by that there bit, whichever it was, but that's centipede. And so whenever that centipede bit me, why, of course it wasn't supposed to, but I started lighting matches, trying to see what bit me, and I had a K-bar knife, and I was crawling all over that there Indian, and I didn't even think about waking him up. But anyway, he was trying to kill that centipede. Well, it got away from me, and then later that night, I think it's at 4 o'clock, I had to get up and go on guard duty, and so when I come back to the pup tent, why, of course, we got them all up, and And I told him that he couldn't talk very good English, and I sure couldn't talk Navajo. And but I tried to tell him, what happened, and I told him I just wondered that he hadn't woke up and scalped me. But I did raise a poncho we was sleeping on, and the centipede was under it, and I killed him then.
Nice. Again, thank you for allowing me your house. This is a good interview. I appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate you doing things like this, because it used to be I didn't even want to talk about service. Now things, wasn't bad in the service. I'd talk about it, but combat, stuff like that, I just didn't talk about it. And but I read in the VFW magazine one time, a guy wrote in there and said if we don't tell this younger generation what we've seen in the war and what war is all about, that they'll never know. And so I started talking more about it then, and so it yet bothers me to talk about it some, and more sometime than others, especially if I start stressing, the certain points that some of the worst things where I can get kind of shook up a little.
Yeah, I don't blame you. And I couldn't agree with the premise of that article at all. I mean, I couldn't agree more with that article. And that's part of the reason why I like to do this, is so people don't have the fairy tale view of what happens.
I thought that was.
But this about the two friends getting killed there is the thing I think that bothers him the most about the memories of the war.
Do you mind if I keep the tape on for a few minutes? Well, actually, this, or do you want me to turn this thing off?
Oh, it don't make any difference.
Okay. There's a couple minutes left, and
Yeah, okay.
I like conversating with people and keeping on the tape, because sometimes things come out even during that. Just a few minutes left, but
Yeah.
I think the thing that always, first off, on a lighter note, the milk. I can't tell you how many veterans I've interviewed that spent time overseas that said one of the first things they drank when they got home was not a beer, but it was milk.
Yep.
You are not alone in that, my friend.
Well, while in the service, I know a lot of people drink quite a bit of beer or whiskey, whatever they can get, but I never cared all that much about beer. I'd drink one once in a while if we come in from off of patrol and hot and tired and everything. I might drink a beer, but I was raised that we didn't have much money, and I could get $1 a can for every beer I could get, and I sold most of my beer.
Nice.
And I just let my pay then build up, and I'd use that for when we did have anything in the PX, where I'd go down to the PX and get candy bars or pop or whatever I get, whatever I happen to have. Which a lot of times I didn't have much of anything.
Well, and the other thing that I'm always amazed by, and this is more a comment on the human condition, is how anyone who engages in combat and experiences some of the things that you've experienced, how they're able to live with that beyond that. Because I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is if I were driving home with my friend and we got in a car accident and he passed away, that would profoundly affect my life. And to think about the things that you guys went through, and he still came home and raised a family.
Day after day.
I wonder how you're able to set that aside.
You don't set it aside. I'm bothered quite a bit at night, even with it. And I know there has been a lot of times I've spent some sleepless nights. Sometimes, if there wasn't this chair here, I'd be sitting in another chair we had before this here. I'd be up at night and couldn't sleep, and sit in the recliner or under the van or most anything.
That's been since he retired. Before he retired, he was so busy, and I think he was so tired at night.
You just slept.
He slept better.
Yeah, I slept better.
But these past few years especially, he's had a lot of problems about sleeping.
And a lot of it is over nightmares.
I heard one veteran tell me that humans don't live long enough to separate ourselves from those memories.
I don't think you do. Here I am, 80 years
Well,
old. It's
it's-
been over 60 years, and so I had the memories, and I think they're as vivid in my mind right now as it was then. I know so many doctors and people like that, oh, you forget stuff like that pretty quick, you know, you don't.
No, I don't think you can. Okay. I'm gonna shut her down. It's gonna do it herself. But again, thank you for your time, sir.
Oh, you're welcome.